So, Freunde, herzlich willkommen zum SEO-Driven Podcast. Ich bin Christian B. Schmidt, Gründer und Geschäftsführer der SEO-Agentur Digital Effects und ihr hört heute mal wieder SEO-Driven, mein Podcast, in dem ich mit anderen Experten und Unternehmern oder Unternehmerinnen und Expertinnen über die Herausforderungen und Trends im Online-Marketing und vor allen Dingen natürlich im SEO spreche. Heute habe ich einen ganz besonderen Gast und zwar Kabeer Singh von Kleinanzeigen.de. Hier gab es ja ein großes Rebranding. Kabeer spricht besser Englisch als Deutsch, ja, ist noch am Lernen, aber deswegen werden wir gleich ans Englische switchen. Für alle, für die Englisch schwerer ist zu verstehen, versuchen wir für die YouTube-Variante deutsche Untertitel bereitzustellen. Also wechselt gerne zu YouTube, wenn ihr es in Deutsch sozusagen mitlesen wollt. First of all, thanks for joining me today, Kabeer. You're in your home office, right?
Most of the days these days is home office.
Yes, perfect. There was just news today that near to eBay and the whole area, there was a lion walking around and eating pigs and things like that. So I think it's better to stay at home today.
Yes, we all got the notification at 6:40. Please, if you were planning today is not the right day.
Ja, stay at home, please stay at home. Bevor es mit dem Interview weitergeht, will ich euch den heutigen Partner der Episode vorstellen, meine SEO-Agentur Digital Effects. Du fragst dich, wie du die Rankings deiner Website verbessern kannst? Dann bewirb dich jetzt für den gratis SEO-Check durch Experten unter digitaleffects.de/SEO-Check. Wir schauen uns deine Website gemeinsam an in einem persönlichen Videocall. Bewirb dich jetzt unter digitaleffects.de/SEO-Check. Okay, so today we are talking about the big migration, one of the biggest the German internet has seen ever. Yeah, for a couple of months ago, 2 months ago, I guess 2 or 3 months ago, eBay-Kleinanzeigen was rebranded to just Kleinanzeigen.de. Yeah, obviously eBay-Kleinanzeigen was one of the most visible websites in terms of search visibility. Also in terms of traffic, I guess, in Germany, yeah, right behind Wikipedia, Amazon, and eBay itself, ahead of heavyweights like Idealo, Chip, Otto, the big German guys. And in the beginning of May, you moved from eBay-Kleinanzeigen.de to Kleinanzeigen.de, so the eBay, you got rid of eBay. In mid of May, there was also a new logo, fresh design, so now it's more kind of a green thing, yeah. And I had a look a little bit on outside data to get an overview, to give everyone an impression how big this project is. Yeah, so obviously you don't have to comment on that. It's data from SimilarWeb, for example. I had a look to in April, eBay-Kleinanzeigen.de had more than 150 million visits. In June, the new domain Kleinanzeigen.de had about 132.7 million, and the old domain still had some million visits as well. Obviously, also visibility. So I had a look into Sistrix. Sistrix also commented on the project and did some analysis already. Johannes Beuys, greetings to Bonn, I guess, did some analysis. And the process of the transfer of the visibility was a little bit slow. It took about 2 months until Kleinanzeigen.de overtook the old domain in terms of visibility and now is at around 400 or 558 visibility points. Again, before eBay Kleinanzeigen had about 1K visibility points, and also the old domain is still in the Google index with about a visibility of 423. So it's a little bit negative, 13%. But shortly after the migration, you posted on LinkedIn that the weekly traffic and also the crawl request, you are very happy with that. So how satisfied are you so far with the migration from an SEO standpoint?
Oh, the short answer, we are super satisfied with what we have seen so far and the numbers that we very briefly wrote about in terms of, the crawling behavior. They are maintained more or less at the same level. So we are happy with that. And I think what we need to also understand, we are also talking about a big 9-digit number. That's the amount of pages in general that we were always serving, and that's a huge chunk. So in terms of the period that in the last 2 months, slowly the switch that has happened, I wouldn't have said that, you know what, in a month the switch would have happened. So about 1.5 to 2 months was also more or less kind of the gut feeling, and it kind of took more or less that amount of time for the crossover. And some, as you said, I think at least the latest number that I have, the sum is more or less close to 1,000, and we were at 1,050 or 60 before. So more or less what you said is basically in the right range.
So you already said you expected it not to go very quickly because obviously Google has to crawl an enormous number of pages. I think there's also a little bit of a challenge because the brand is so big. Some of the parts of the website couldn't be changed immediately, and it's a whole process in its own. So, what do you think? How long do you expect this whole process to take? And did you take any additional measures already to speed up the process, or do you just leave it as is and see what Google is doing out of it?
So for the first part, so given that it's what remains right now is more long tailish, which means so far we haven't seen it slow down. So if we look at the day to day, I mean, visibility is one measure which is pretty public and can be checked by everybody. Can be seen. The day to day switch between eBay K2K is more or less has been consistent in the last days and will continue, but I would expect that to also slow down in a bit. So I would expect at least 2 months before we are getting close to where the level where we were. On the second question, what did we do? So I think it's a huge domain. So we consciously did not want to make any structural changes. That means how the structure of the site, how the equity flows kind of stays the same. What some pages, which as we would call it, more high valuable pages, even though they were heavily linked, they are currently heavily linked across the whole domain, how we kind of link. So I won't go into details of how we link, but even though they're highly linked, some of them did not get as much of visibility as we would have expected. So even though we have a fully automated sitemap generation setup, we in addition added some special cases, let's call it 500,000 of such cases, where we said, you know what, even though they might be generated because they generate traffic and they generate internally, equity, let's try to give them another push just so that it's if for some day they did not have a period of time they did not have the visibility via the internal setup, we are kind of ensuring that.
Okay, okay.
That was one thing that I would say was something which we had kind of foreseen, so we were prepared to kind of put that thing out. So after, although given that almost all our setups are automated, we didn't want to kind of introduce this manually inserting an additional sitemap. But given that we were prepared, so we added that to kind of to balance that out, what we were missing out.
Yeah, additional sitemaps or manual sitemaps can in general be very helpful to get rid of sites, to get sites updated and so on. Yeah. So that seems very reasonable to me as well. Yeah. Tell us about the general process. So I guess so the biggest relaunch we ever were part of was of Duden.de, so the big dictionary in Germany. It was much smaller than than your property was, but still pretty big. And I think the whole process from start to finish was about 1.5 years or something like that. Yeah, we were involved in the whole process with also aftermath and things like that. So I imagine that this project was not started to plan a couple of weeks ago. So give us a brief overview. When did the whole planning start for this project? And did you get involved right from the start, or was it just like, okay, these are the plans, now Kabeer, that's your job?
Okay, so actually, before we even start, I think maybe the migration has already happened. So back in 2009, from Kijiji to Kleinanzeigen.ebay.de, and then back in 2015, which probably at Kijiji time it was still smaller, but 2015-ish. The reason of kind of context of that is some of the experts which were involved. When I say experts, it's more from the tech side. Some of the experts and the knowledge was still there, but that also kind of means you kind of are not playing in a totally new waters, but there was some kind of experience of migrating domain. To your question, so yeah, I was involved right from the beginning because the process also started where we were evaluating where should we go. So after the sale, we were not sure, or we had to decide what is the right place to be, whether it's Kleinanzeigen, whether it's something else, and then the availability. So it was also about understanding going where kind of makes sense. Obviously, from the SEO was not the only input because of the branding reasons. Branding team also had their concerns and preferences and so on. That's where kind of the process started, which was even before planning. Okay, you know what? Now that we've decided this is kind of the right place to be, what does it take to kind of make it happen? So that was kind of the starting point, and yeah, that goes back about 1.5 years.
It reminds me a lot of the migration of Real to Kaufland, which was also the second one. So there was also a team that did it multiple times. So it was a little bit more, they were a little bit more used to it, not their first time, especially for this kind of big project. So in general, who were other stakeholders? So because if we take a look on the outside in data, of course, SEO or organic search traffic takes a huge chunk of the traffic overall of the domain. So I imagine the SEO team has a lot of power within the organization. We will talk about that later as well. But also for a lot of SEOs, today it's a challenge to handle all the other stakeholders. Yeah, as you said, branding has to be involved. Yeah, you can just not just take a domain that has great DR and things like that. Yeah. So it also has to be, from a branding perspective, a good domain. But also, you don't want to take a burnt domain that just sounds great. So, who were the other stakeholders and how was the project coordinated? Who was the lead here in terms of department or organization?
That's from management team to the branding team to the legal team. So everybody from that perspective was involved. And when you said cost when we look at the web, SEO is a huge share, but we also have to think we also have apps which are massive, and that does not mean SEO is any lower, but in comparison, there is a lot on the branding and general user perspective, how users see and use our platform. There is kind of a lot on that side also that has to be considered. And given that I'm not speaking numbers, it's a huge chunk. It's not a small chunk.
So app, yeah, obviously is also a big component here. You already talked about the fact that you did as little changes to the website as possible. Yeah, so there was no structural changes. This is also what is best practice, I would say, but most companies don't do. Yeah, so if they do some kind of rebranding, redesign, relaunch, whatever, they try to change everything because now is the one chance to do it, and then after that 5 to 10 years nothing else will move again. So were there other changes up to the debate, or was it clear from the beginning that it can't be done other than with the most little minor changes to the structure of the website?
Yeah, I think it was super clear we want to minimize any kind of risk and keeping it to bare minimum. So that was very clear. As you notice, the green color and the branding related changes, obviously I will not comment anything, but I think one thing which is super relevant for SEO that I would definitely comment. If anybody did not use our apps before and was a fan of MWeb, just like I am, we had an eBay-Kleinanzeigen until year and a half.
Yeah.
So one of the very conscious decisions was we take the M dot domain, which was a dedicated on M dot subdomain, we migrate that to dynamic serving setup much before we migrate, and that would serve as a blueprint of what we would do. So that migration was, I would say, probably 20, 30, 40%, because if we were able to do it at scale on the live platform, then that gives us, creates a much easier, comfortable feel to play with while during the actual migration. So this is something that we did. We wanted to finish at least 9 months before, but we finished about 8 or 7.5 months before the actual migration to give enough time to make sure all M dot, and I know again, it's a huge scale, so it would never, we still have the M dot URL somewhere in the index, but the major scale, so 90 to 95% was completely gone. And that kind of, as I said, was the blueprint of what we would do in future. So that's something that was, let's say, one massive migration before the migration is what we did.
So it's still a good chance to get rid of some things before you do the big step, right? So the other way around, many other people would say, okay, let's get rid of it when we do the migration or the relaunch, or even more worse afterwards in some kind. But yeah, very interesting to hear. Yeah, I saw some of the domains in the visibility as still as well. Yeah, but there was a big already in November last year. There was a big drop already. So this was the thing you prepared beforehand, right?
Absolutely. So November was the cutoff, and we were able to finish that by November, so giving us at least 6 months. Ideally, 7 would have been perfect, but doesn't matter. 6 months for that, and that also gave us some data-related points. So how much time it took.
Will it take?
Yeah, exactly. So how much time did it take for that? That helps us in our mind also to basically say, okay, you know what? This much of time did it take for M dot. Therefore, that's much what we can expect.
When preparing, obviously, the biggest time frame of the whole project was the preparation, right? So you did get rid of the M dot subdomain. You prepared all the other stuff you talked about. I think there maybe with Real and Kaufland, they did it that they could actually test the new domain internally already, so they didn't have to switch domains and things like that. I think that's best practice as well.
One thing which we definitely did as a part of, we thought we might cover it at some point, was because we had the domain with us at first, we wanted to make sure we kind of killed all the old URLs and all the connections, either with the category that was very prominent with the old domain, that was the dating category, which we don't have. So making sure all the signals are gone. But given that we had the domain, in this scenario, we had the chance of having the domain live before. So the domain Kleinanzeigen.de was moved. So almost even about 3, 4 weeks or 5 weeks back. But obviously, we did it in a way, as you would imagine, equivalent of, so not exactly password, but in a setup that helped us test basically everything as if the domain was live. We did it via the cookie method. So I'm not sure if those technicalities are interesting, but that basically means we were, with those special cookies, able to see as what it would be in a month's time. So from eBay K, you could easily go to K, so the pure so-called redirection. So what I said in the blueprint of what we did in MWeb, so the same thing, given that the domain was almost live for a month without any kind of crawls or anything. So hidden for the world, but only if you had that special access. So that kind of enabled both way access. So if you were a normal user, you would go from, as the expected behavior, from Kleinanzeigen, a 3 or eBay K. But if you are basically the special in-house tester, so to say, or a crawler with a special, let's call it cookie params and so on, then you would see the exact behavior about, a month before.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation as well. If you take over another domain that had content before, test things and see how it works out.
And completely, basically exactly as it was, or as it would be.
Guys, also for everybody listening, because we do consult on a lot of smaller relaunch projects. Sometimes we don't even have any kind of staging or backup system. So every time we talk to a client that has some kind of agency that wants to do the switch in the live system, we first stop them and tell them, okay, no, you can't do it like that. You have to have a test system, at least a parallel staging system where we can have a look in before. And then also from timeframes, as you said, you did this minor tweak month ahead. So we also advise all of our clients to have a time buffer also for changes after SEO had a look on it, because most of the times we're just like some kind of plug-in, in the whole process. This time, when you do it in-house, you can do it much better. But also, I imagine there was a longer time frame. As you said, you did changes to the actual old domain with getting rid of the M dot subdomain. So I think there was a big time span where you had also to maintain the SEO of the old domain in parallel to planning and preparing for the migration. How did you do that? Was it a running system? You didn't had to touch anything, or were there a freeze in tickets and things like that? Or how did you maintain the parallel structure of an old running website on the old domain and the new plans with the rebranding?
We had to, at least some of the initiative that we had otherwise we would have done when it comes to attracting more traffic and visibility on the main platform, we had kept it on pause simply because we knew that there would be structural changes. So we kept it at bare minimum. So there was something, so I would say, at a capacity of 10 to 20%, where we had the capacity even to kind of release them, but not more than that.
Okay, so there was literally a kind of freeze of bigger changes before the migration,
Bigger changes, absolutely.
and these projects were postponed after that.
Yeah.
Makes sense as well. So let's talk about after the migration went live. So when I was digging here in my tools, yeah, trying to find some nuggets to talk about in parallel to the m dot domain that went away long before the migration, I found some subfolders for internal searches that gained some visibility after the change from m dot to www. These searches, for example, for cars, bikes, and things like that, gained visibility that stayed very long. So are there other artifacts or things you're still worried about or working on to get rid of? How do you also view it from the perspective of the domain in terms of what Google is doing wrong? Because sometimes we have projects as well, especially with new sites. We see things that don't make any sense. Google is indexing pages that didn't even exist. Yeah, so they index pages that don't exist and things like that. So are there any things Google does weird here?
Yeah, that's also a good question. Maybe I can share one thing for sure. So, as you know, the website was exactly the same. So, at least for 2 3 weeks, we saw canonical in Search Console being shown on pages that, as you said, they are should be behind the login or login pages.
Yeah.
I mean, that obviously made sure we also dug into the code just to see if there was any change. But 1.5 2 weeks, and they're like, oh no, it's the canonical thing that they were choosing themselves was okay. Now we choose the right canonical. So for 2 weeks it was out there. It did in the beginning bother us if we had to check something on our side. Thankfully, luckily, we didn't have to make any change. But that's the one part where you say some strange canonicals. And I could imagine, I mean, in this case, if I had to understand or argue why that was being shown, we need to also understand this domain had a history. We obviously tried to kill as much as history as possible, but some things could potentially be an outcome. And also we see it in logs, and I won't say exact URLs, but some URLs which were a few years back on this domain have been 410s. They're still 404 right now, but they were basically just because they were somewhere in the back of the queue and so on. So my theory would be some of those strange things, and that's one example that I gave you, probably was coming out of that, but that had nothing to do with any change on the page that we had to, although we still wanted to double check if there was something that we were playing around that was not expected. I mean, it's always good to be cautious, then, yeah, kind of skip that, even though we knew that question mark did not make sense on the canonical part, just as an example.
Yeah, I think especially canonicals, other SEOs could sing a song about that as well, we would say in Germany. So the canonicals Google assigns to pages are sometimes very weird. Yeah. Let's talk about the general organization and how SEO is organized within your company. So obviously your job title is SEO product manager. So there's one nugget in there with the product, which is one of the bigger discussions when it comes to in-house SEO. Where does the SEO department, if you would call it like that, belong to? Does it belong to marketing? Does it belong to product? In your case, it seems like it's product. So how's SEO organized within the organization or the company in general?
And obviously, there's no clear answer because depending on the domain, depending on what bigger levers are, it could actually sit anywhere. Looking at last few years, it totally made sense that from last year, especially last year and a half, it made sense that most of the initiatives, not that we are not doing anything on the content side, but most of the initiatives are focused on changes on the platform, which obviously means it has a lot to do with making changes on the platform, so web and MWeb. And that's why basically where the introduction or connect with the product is absolutely essential, especially when we talk about this scenario. But having said that, it also means for other kind of platforms where it's a nice balance between, on the pure content side, there you could argue where it makes more sense.
When it's more on the product side, things are organized a little bit different than in marketing. So I assume you're working within a sprint planning with kind of OKR. What are the general terms you can tell us about how you organize your work or measure success in any shape or form?
From a success point of view, I can talk about, of course, we have overall vibrancy related KPI that we want to focus. So that's something that all the initiatives could point towards that.
Is the organization typically organized towards the typical product management way you would do it? So with sprint planning, with OKRs, things like that, or is it? Yeah, so you already told the SEO part, yeah. So visibility, traffic is obviously, but what would you say? You worked in other positions as well, maybe also in a team that was more oriented towards marketing. What are the specialties within a product-led SEO team in general, from your perspective?
Let's call it with the product team, we work in cross-functional setups or sharing resources. So not all the SEO initiatives are done in the same product setup. So they are also some of the page speed, as we know, or vitals and so on. They go beyond the standard setup. So that's where we have kind of a resource sharing or help that we get from other units which are outside the group or outside the setup. And other than that, we have a very typical cross-functional setup which involve people from, as you initially said, also from marketing. So even when I was not essentially product or marketing, so there was the cross-functional team setup kind of took care of that also.
When we talk SEO, we already talked about some tools. Yeah. So you mentioned things like visibility, traffic, and so on. I think there are some obvious tool sets specific kinds of companies are working with. Can you share which tools you are working with? Are you Camp Sistrix, Camp Search Metrics? Are you Camp Ahrefs? Are you Camp Screaming Frog? What's the preferred SEO tool from your personal standpoint?
Okay. I mean, me personally, never a big fan of always relying on one. But if I had to still choose one, I can then at least give a slight preference. So first of all, we obviously use almost all the tools that kind of exist. So we have access at least to all of them. So including even though we use Spotify for the, crawling at the scale that we want to do. But I obviously still have been using Screaming Frog since really the early days. So that's kind of the handy tool always for any kind of quick checks and so on. And then Systrix, search metrics, obviously both. It's hard to choose. I mean, for indicators, they both kind of have their strength and weaknesses. So I kind of end up always looking at both of them. And then from the typical SEM Rush or Ahrefs, I just end up using Ahrefs a little bit more than SEM Rush. I think the usability wise probably is just better. But other than that, both of them cover fair amount of keyword level data, competitor data, and so on. So yeah, just the personal preference, but both are, I would say, more or less similar level.
Obviously, you're working for a big brand, a big domain. You just switched the domain. Then SEOs would say, okay, take care of your backlinks. Is backlinks anything you take into account, and to which extent would you say?
I had a very different perspective, at least before this, because having worked at domains that are big and small, so I absolutely know the importance, and especially eBay-Kleinanzeigen domain and then currently Kleinanzeigen. That's an area where just keeping an eye is the only thing that I personally do, and mainly the reason for that is the organic coverage that we get from two sides, one from PR related coverage, and one from we have users that are sharing their ads across platforms, and that's not a small chunk, that's a huge amount, whether it's ads, whether it's smaller businesses which are sharing their page organically. It's insane.
And then another big question, I would say, in SEO is whether to work with an agency or some kind of external advisory, freelancers, consultants. Do you work with any of them, or is it just an in-house effort?
Primarily in-house effort, but if need-based, if there is any time a need, it totally makes sense. The other information to add to that is we also are not just eBay Kleinanzeigen or Kleinanzeigen. There is a lot of knowledge around other domains, countries, different brands within the organization. So there is a lot of in-house knowledge in that scenario. If it was kind of a standalone Kleinanzeigen, maybe my answer would have been slightly different, because obviously one can never be 100% know all kind of in all possible topics. So there is always information exchange or something that makes sense. In this process, within internally, we had some discussion, some brainstorming of if it's a good idea to do it, because some of these changes were happening at a live level. Long story short, we take support wherever it's needed, but primarily in-house, not just Kleinanzeigen, but in a broader group, there is enough knowledge that we have. So the right setup, I think it was always it depends on the context of how big the in-house team is, how much is the knowledge, but external support is always a benefit to kind of get a feeling of what we have been, thinking inside a bubble and we missed out something super obvious.
Und wenn du wissen willst, wie du deine Website-Rankings verbessern kannst, dann bewirb dich jetzt unter digitaleffects.de/SEO-Check für einen persönlichen Videocall mit mir oder meinen Kollegen, wo wir dir konkrete Tipps geben. Okay, Kabeer, thanks a lot for sharing all of that with us. Thanks a lot to take part of this podcast, giving some insights to Kleinanzeigen and the whole migration. Ja, vielen Dank, dass ihr zugehört habt. Lasst uns sehr gerne natürlich einen Daumen nach oben bei YouTube da, falls ihr hier reingeschaut habt. Bewertet den Podcast bei Spotify, Apple, lasst gerne auch Grüße dort und natürlich so viele Sterne, wie ihr geben wollt. Nächste Woche geht es weiter im SEO-Driven Podcast. Bis dahin, euer Christian and thanks a lot, Kabeer. Bye bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.